Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and today we're talking about gifts and how you can discover them. And I know for many of you, you've taken the assessments, you've had people talk to you about spiritual gifts, about what you do best in the workplace, and so on. And sometimes that conversation can get exhausting. But today we're taking a new approach and talking to somebody who's been spending a lot of time and research helping us understand our unique gifts for this unique moment. And I think you're going to appreciate hearing from him. Tony Cook, he's the Vice President of Global Ministries for Lutheran Hour Ministries, but has a background in all this kind of design and development, curriculum, education, technology, but also as a pastor. He has a PhD from St. Louis University and an MDiv from Concordia University, but he's the creator and author of this guide called Path to Purpose Guide that's helping so many people better understand their gifts and how to use them. And so we're going to get into a conversation about your gifts and about the 12 specific gifts that they call out through their assessment process that really help us better define how do our gifts work today in the culture we're in today. And you're going to hear me ask him about some of these unique gifts that he's labeling. I've never seen anybody label these as gifts, and so you're not going to want to miss seeing where you might fit into the equation. And by the way, when we're done with this podcast, you're going to hear exactly where you can go get a free download of it, and you can go through a process yourself to learn your gifts. But for now, let's listen now to my conversation with Tony Cook. Well, Tony, welcome back to the Q Ideas Podcast.
Hey, it's great to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Well, the conversation is so important. And the more work that we're doing with the next generation, we're finding this coming up all the time, which is people trying to navigate their giftedness, trying to understand who they were meant to be, trying to find it. I know one of my mentors, Pete Richardson, talks about how so many people live their entire life and go to the grave not ever realizing what they were meant to do. And this has been a lot of your work, is helping people not do that. You're trying to help people better understand their gifts and how it's meant to play out in the wide world. But talk a little bit about why for you this has become such a passion.
Yeah, I think for me, we focus on the church proclaiming the message of salvation, which is, of course, excellent and important. We tell people how to navigate, sin, Jesus, death, resurrection, the life to come. But for me, being a Christian isn't something that I'm simply waiting for Jesus to come or for me to pass my time here on earth. But each and every day, I live a Christian life. And my question has always been, I know what God is going to do with me in the future, but what does he want from me today? And this was really, I think, brought to a head for me during COVID. And people were on the internet, in the forums, posting articles about meaning and purpose. And so I thought, the Bible has a lot to say about who we are, whose we are, and what we've been designed to be. So for me, the very, very kind of simple point was that each and every one of us have been created by God, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you live, regardless of how you've been brought up. And we are a one-of-a-kind person. We're the only person with this unique set of skills. And that's really how God designed it. From the very beginning, all of us together as a human community have been gifted with all the gifts necessary for health, well-being, and thriving as God's people. And so I wanted to focus on a way of approaching our giftedness that validates who we are, validates that God is the creator of all, and helps people understand that even if you don't know your gifts, God knows them, and he desires you to become aware of them and to intentionally use them generously.
Yeah, that's great. And the way you do it though is so unique. And I want you to explain, because I know people get a little overwhelmed by the number of ways to try to understand their gifts, their strengths. I mean, you've got everything from strengths finders to Myers-Briggs assessments, DISC assessments, a working genius. Like there's just so many ways people start to figure out who they are and learn a little bit more about themselves. And you've taken a little bit of a different approach. And of course, you're adding in this portion that a lot of the world may not think about, spiritual gifts, right? And you're working in a space where you have Christians who are learning about the spiritual gifts and trying to understand, is that part of my gifts? How does all this work? So help us understand the way in which you've approached gifts.
Sure. Well, when I was a parish pastor, a lot of the gifts that we focused on were your traditional gifts for the service of the church. Depending on what background you come from, your church might utilize the gifts of the APES, the apostle, prophet kind of gifts. And then there's also the approach of the fruits of the Spirit, love and kindness, things like that. But a lot of times within the body of Christ, the human gifts that we've been given, our technical gifts, our cultural gifts, our artistic gifts, a lot of times these gifts are seen outside of who we are as God's children. They're seen more for what we do at work, so like our occupation. So our approach to it is that we believe that the gifts that each of us have been given by God are to be utilized for more than just work. Obviously, they're to be utilized there. But that if we want to have our neighborhoods and our communities and our societies be healthy, that it takes all of us using those gifts, exploring those gifts, and developing those gifts. And it's interesting for congregational work, when you talk to churches, not only do we talk about kind of your traditional spiritual gifts, but we talk about how those gifts are used for the sake of that particular ministry, which is great. We all need those gifts used for our particular church, our congregation. But what about those that we live around? What about the neighborhoods and the communities in which God has placed us? And in the same way that God intends us to use our gifts for His glory as the body of Christ within the church, in a very kind of primordial way, there is this desire for us to use our gifts for humanity in general. And one of the big turning points for me when I looked at the understanding of giftedness wasn't from like an economical standpoint, but it was really from a human standpoint. A lot of times we look at people, especially in our culturally crazy age in which we're in, and we think to ourselves, well, that person doesn't have anything to offer. They don't think like me. They don't vote like me. They don't live where I live. And so we tend to only look at people who are like ourselves and then ask how we can use our gifts for those people like us. But the way God has designed us is in this kind of grand diversity of human life. And in order for us to lean in to who we were created to be in the Garden of Eden, all the way back there with Adam and Eve, I felt this calling to validate every single person for who they were, that each and every person is a gift from God. They are a creature, a creation of God. And that started to change how I saw every person I passed on the street. It wasn't putting them into a box or a classification, but I could look at each of them as unique and special, one-of-kind creations from God and ask myself the question, how can I help them discover that uniqueness? And how can I help them use it for God's glory, but also for the betterment of the people around them in their daily lives?
Yeah, I love how you've laid it out too. Like you have these 12 specific gifts, but a few of them are ones people will be familiar with, things like leadership or teamwork or management gifts, interpersonal gifts, artistic gifts. But you have a few in here that I thought, man, these are interesting. One of them is called critical thinking gifts. Yeah. Talk about that one. What is the gift of critical thinking?
Well, it's as a gift I wish I had more of, actually. But critical thinking is the gift of being able to problem solve, to work through data. If you think about today's society, I mean, how much data and information do we get? How much of it is valid? What can you do with that data? Well, people with those critical thinking gifts, they have the ability to look at that data, to process it, and to make decisions based off of, to kind of harness it through analytical thinking, through creativity, through decision making. And if you think on our day-to-day lives, how many decisions do we make every single day? How much creativity does living in this world call for? I mean, tons of it. How many things are we asked to evaluate, analyze, make decisions on? So this is one of those kind of God-given. We were created this way as human beings. So our gift of critical thinking sets us apart from many other of his creations. And it's a gift that we've been given to reflect and to analyze and to make decisions that give him glory and support our neighbor.
Yeah, and you have a couple others I'll just mention, and you can riff on these.
Yeah.
But just for people to hear kind of the unique way you're approaching it, one's called civic gifts. You have another one called intercultural gifts. Talk a little bit about those and why you chose, again, some of these gifts that maybe other assessments aren't even thinking about, and they're pretty unique to what you're doing.
Sure. Well, for me, civic gifts was extremely important. There's kind of this pull sometimes between being a Christian and being a citizen. And a lot of times they can be placed in opposition to one another. But all of us live in a human situation. We all live in a kind of society, and it might be different levels, local, regional, federal, or our society within a country, or even in a whole area of the world. And leadership, the impact that can make within civic gifts allows people to help organize that basic sociological structure of humanity. For me, I'm kind of like a hyper-local person, so I think almost all politics happens locally at one point or another. But not everybody is encouraged to utilize their gifts within that local community civic setting. So these would come along with things like not only understanding the civic structure of where you live, but also having advocacy for those who are in your communities, those who would be marginalized, those who are underserviced. Yeah. And so to me, that's a perfect place for Christians to lean into.
Yeah.
It kind of plays along with the intercultural part, which we have a lot of clashes, I think, too, in society today, and even within the church. Intercultural gifts, especially as the world becomes more diverse, is extremely important. I grew up in a town of 600 people where everybody looked the same and believed the same and did the same thing. But the world has become more and more diversified, and you see people from all kinds of cultures wherever you go. I was just actually in London, and I was doing some work over there, and I was amazed at kind of how cosmopolitan it was. There were on the street, every other person looked different. They were from all of these different nations and countries and cultural backgrounds. And we know that one of those gifts is to be able to look and deal across cultures, to realize that while someone's different from us, that it doesn't mean that they're bad or we should be frightened of them, but that they bring a perspective that we ourselves don't have. And so those intercultural gifts really acknowledge those gifts of language, of culture, the ability to understand those differences, how to respect one another regardless of where we come from. And for me right now, if I could increase a gift magically in everyone in the United States, that would be one of the ones I would choose, because I think it's so vitally important.
Yeah. No, it's a great one to reference, and it feels so relevant to where we're at right now and such a need for it. What have you found are some of the reasons people don't quite engage their gifts? Is it that we're not talking about it enough? Is there not enough spaces or coaching or mentoring or discipleship happening? Like, why do you think there's so many people struggling to figure this out? And is this a conversation we should be having around the world? Does it feel like a privileged conversation? What do you think about just kind of the theology of God giving us gifts that we discover?
Yeah, I would just the last part you said. Do you think this is a privileged conversation? I would say that if it is, it shouldn't be. Most definitely. I travel all over the world in the work that I do, and I see people leaning into their gifts regardless of what country they live in or what social class they're in. In fact, I see people being extremely resourceful and relying on their gifts to survive in their daily lives. So it's not like a leisure thing that, well, if I got time, I can use this gift. But all of us are using our gifts on our daily basis. I think what's happened is that a lot of the conversation has been focused on using our gifts to earn money. So a lot of the surveys that you talked about are used for business purposes. So what are my gifts in the workplace or something like that? But I believe that we've kind of compartmentalized it. And then when we think about the church, we think about the gifts maybe the spiritual leaders of that congregation have. So the gift of preaching or counseling or whatever that might be. But I believe that when we see ourselves as God's people living out our daily lives faithfully before Him, that's a conversation we haven't really had. I mean, as a pastor, I've had that desire to have people, of course, leave the church and go out and practice hospitality and help their neighbors. But to be honest, I spent a ton of my time in the parish just maintaining the congregation, working on the volunteerism that I needed to support the vital programming that we were doing. Personally, I don't know that I was casting the vision of the use of those gifts in daily life, or perhaps I was so focused on the need to utilize those gifts to work in our particular mission in our congregation that I failed to do it. And I also think people really just think from the time they're trained when they're children, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
It isn't a person who lives their daily life faithfully before God. It's all about utilizing the gifts that we have for occupation. And I think plenty of work has been put into using your gifts for occupation. I think this is kind of a turn to say what would happen if we focus on our gifts, not simply for occupation, but for living our daily lives.
Yeah, that's great, because I think you're right. When we focus on it just making money or using it in that way, we're missing out God's design. And what I want listeners to understand too is what's awesome about you guys is you give away this information. So this is like super helpful and simple. Your Path to Purpose guidebook is available to anybody listening. You can download it, and it actually walks you through all these different gifts and helps you start to assess for yourself what your gifting is. And that's at purpose.lhm.org. That's purpose.lhm.org. But Tony, coming back to gifts, and earlier I was mentioning the next generation, like very hungry to understand their gifts. What are you seeing about the way that they are approaching this? Is there any trends you're seeing about the way younger generations think about this?
Yeah, I think, we have found, especially with the younger generations, that the ability to mentor and to explore gifts with the next generation is important. A lot of young people kind of get stuck in that, we go to school, you got to think about what job you're going to get. How am I going to have a side hustle, start a new YouTube channel, all of those type of things for financial survival. But being able to walk alongside this next generation and help them see in themselves the things they might not see. I mean, if you think about when you were young, when you were a teenager, I didn't really have like a full picture of what my own gifts were. And it really wasn't until I had a community of people around me that could see me from the outside, that could begin to show me the things that I couldn't see in myself. And not only is it important to help people become aware of those gifts, but mentoring the development of gifts in the next generation is going to be key, I believe, to their well-being. They're a very different generation. They approach work life very differently. Many, as you can see on the blogs and the internet, are not that interested in spending their life helping a company get rich, but they're looking for what difference do I as a person make in this world? And I think this approach has the ability to help them discover that.
Yeah, I remember being with an economist several years ago talking about the generational shifts and how, when a new generation's coming up where it's clear they're not going to earn as much income as their parents, which for so many years and generations was kind of the thing to do. Like, oh, my parents made this much money. I want to earn more than them, and that's success. We finally, in these last couple of generations, have hit that moment where that's no longer a drive. That's not even of interest. That's not even important. It's not even desired. It's the desire is meaning and purpose and fulfillment of the call. And I think this resource is so helpful for people to start doing that. And you made a point that I want to encourage everybody listening, leaders who are part of this community. Our ability to call out the gifts in the next generation when we see them is critical. We often, all of us are insecure. We don't necessarily know what our gifts are. Like we think we have a hint towards it. We tend to have validation here and there, but there's something about somebody looking you in the eye and saying, I see this in you, and I want you to know that, and I want you to keep growing in it because God's going to use that in an amazing way. And that's something we got to take the time to do and not be so busy we overlook that, because those moments, I know in my life, were huge. And I'm sure for you, Tony, too, you had people that did that, and it made a significant difference in your trajectory. Will you tell us all a little more about the Path to Purpose guidebook that's downloadable? It's free. It's in the show notes for anybody who might want to get that, or maybe for their college student or a high school student or a friend, or as part of their church, they just want to explore this conversation further. Tell them a little bit more about what they could expect.
Sure. Well, we kind of break the journey up into three parts. The first is awareness. And that's kind of, as we talked about, growing in your understanding of your own strengths, abilities, and talents. The second part of that path, once we kind of have discovered that, is to begin to utilize those skills intentionally. So a lot of us, even when we discover what talents we have, the intentionality of those use of those skills isn't as strong as we would like. And one of the things we discovered is that skills really in our abilities only blossom and grow when they're actively being used. So the intentionality of using those skills not only is a gift to others, but it actually has a feedback loop where it makes us more aware of what we can do, and it strengthens those skills as well. And then finally, as we're doing that, the third leg of that journey is what we call generosity. So it's learning to multiply our strengths, to give those gifts away to others. But just as important, it moves us towards helping others do the same thing. So this isn't simply about self-improvement, but it's literally about each of us helping the other discover and become aware of their gifts, deploying those gifts, strengthening those gifts, and then sharing them with one another as a community, just as God has designed. So those three basic phases is what you'll find in the Path to Purpose downloadable. And there's some reflection questions there for you. There's also some points to apply, such about looking at your community and looking for patterns in your life to kind of discover these things. But we walk you through everything up to creating an action plan for using those gifts, help you find a champion or a coach to use those gifts, and give you some ideas about your first steps into generosity. And if you really want to just kind of discover your gifts more deeply, we also created our own inventory, which is called the Every Gift Inventory, that will give you an inventory of the 12 individual gifts that we were talking about. And you can find the link for that inside of the PDF, or you could simply go to lhm.org/everygift. And that's also free. It'll give you a PDF printout of your gifts, of your top 2 gifts, of areas that you can develop and explore. You can use it on your own. You could use it with your family or your small group or with your whole church.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for that resource and for all the work that you're doing to help people uncover gifts. We know it means a lot to our Creator that we discover and discern and live within these gifts that He's given us. But sometimes we need a little bit of help, and you guys are helping us do that. So thank you, Tony.
No, it's my pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Tony. I want to encourage you, go get that guidebook. You can download it for free at purpose.lhm.org. And when you go there, you'll see all about this. You can sign up to get more content and information from them around these gifts. But that Path to Purpose guidebook is a free download for you there. And I think you're going to love it. Well designed and a great process for you, a student, a friend, to go through together. If you're in that place right now where you find yourself just wondering, I want to better understand my gifts. I want to get it a little more defined, not so generic and general. I think you're going to enjoy this process. Well, until next time, I hope you have a wonderful week.